The parking notice appeared on my windshield like a death sentence, and I knew my peaceful life in the Riverside Meadows community was about to get complicated. I stood there in the Arizona heat, squinting at the bright orange piece of paper that someone had carefully tucked under my wiper blade. My Ford F-250 sat exactly where I had parked it the night before, in the same spot I had been using for the past 3 years. The notice was from the Riverside Meadows Homeowners Association, and it threatened to tow my truck within 72 hours if I did not move it to a designated parking area. The signature at the bottom belonged to Patricia Morrison, HOA president, and just seeing her name made my blood pressure rise. My name is Owen Reynolds, and I had moved to this Phoenix suburb 5 years ago after selling my tech startup. The house was perfect, the neighbors were mostly friendly, and everything had been smooth sailing until Patricia took over as HOA president 18 months ago. Since then, the community had transformed from a relaxed residential area into something resembling a military compound with ridiculous rules. I pulled out my phone and dialed my neighbor Marcus, who had warned me about Patricia when she first started her campaign for HOA president. "Let me guess," Marcus answered. "You got the orange notice too?" "Yeah, what is this nonsense about designated parking areas? I am parked in front of my own house." Marcus sighed. "Patricia called an emergency meeting last week when you were in California for that conference. She pushed through new parking regulations. Now we can only park in the community lot behind the clubhouse. That lot is a 1/4 mile from my house. I am supposed to walk that distance every time I need something from my truck." "Welcome to the new Riverside Meadows," Marcus said bitterly. "I got the same notice, so did everyone else on our street who parks in front of their houses." I crumpled the notice in my fist. "This is insane. What was the vote count? 15-8. Patricia stacked the meeting with her friends." Most of the community did not even know about it because she only sent out notices 48 hours in advance, buried in a mass email about landscaping updates. After hanging up with Marcus, I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. I had read them when I bought the house, but that was years ago, and clearly, I needed a refresher. The original parking regulations stated that homeowners could park in front of their properties as long as vehicles were properly registered and maintained. There was nothing about mandatory community lot parking. The amendment process required a vote at a properly announced meeting with at least 30 days' notice to all homeowners. If Marcus was right about the 48-hour notice buried in another email, Patricia had violated the HOA's own procedures. I drafted an email to Patricia, carefully explaining that the parking regulation change was invalid due to improper notice, and that I would not be moving my truck. I kept it professional and cited the specific bylaw sections she had violated. Then, I sent copies to the entire HOA board. Patricia's response came within 20 minutes. "Mr. Reynolds, the board has determined that the meeting notice was adequate. Your truck will be towed at 8 a.m. on Friday if it remains in its current location. The towing fee will be $350 plus a $500 fine for violation of community standards. This is not negotiable. Regards, Patricia Morrison, HOA president." I read the email 3 times, my anger building with each pass. The casual dismissal, the threat, the completely made-up fine structure. Patricia was drunk on the tiny amount of power her position gave her, and she was wielding it like a weapon. Friday morning arrived with me sitting on my front porch at 7:30, coffee in hand, waiting. My truck sat in the exact same spot. I had spent the previous 2 days consulting with a real estate attorney named Sarah Chen, who specialized in HOA disputes. She had confirmed that Patricia's parking regulation was legally invalid and that any towing would constitute illegal seizure of property. At exactly 8 o'clock, a flatbed tow truck rounded the corner. Patricia's silver Lexus followed close behind. I stood up as the tow truck driver got out, a clipboard in his hand. "Morning," I called out. "You here for the Ford?" "Yes, sir. Got a work order from the HOA." I walked down my driveway, holding a document Sarah had prepared. "I need you to read this before you hook up that truck. It is a legal notice that the towing order is invalid and that you and your company will be held liable for any damages or legal fees if you proceed." The driver took the paper, his expression shifting from routine boredom to concern as he read. Patricia got out of her Lexus, her sensible pumps clicking on the asphalt. "What is the holdup?" she demanded. "The work order is valid. Tow the truck." The driver looked between us. "Madam, this gentleman is saying the HOA does not have the authority to order this tow. I am the HOA president, and I am telling you that we absolutely have that authority. Now do your job or I will find someone who will." I handed the driver my business card. "You will notice that is my attorney's number at the bottom. If you hook up my truck, you will be hearing from her within the hour. Your company will be named in the lawsuit along with the HOA." The driver had been in this business long enough to smell legal trouble. "Look, I am not getting my company involved in a property dispute. If you two have issues, work them out. I am leaving." Patricia's face turned an impressive shade of red. "You cannot just leave. I have a valid work order." "Then take it up with your lawyer, madam. I am not touching that truck." He climbed back into his flatbed and drove away, leaving Patricia standing in the middle of the street. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You think you are clever. You think you can just ignore the rules because you have money for lawyers. I think you pushed through an invalid regulation and are now trying to enforce it illegally," I replied calmly. "The bylaws require 30 days' notice for amendments. You gave people 48 hours, buried in an email about landscaping. That is not proper notice, Patricia. The board voted and passed it. That makes it valid." "Actually, it does not, but you are welcome to keep trying. Just know that every action you take to enforce this invalid regulation exposes you and the HOA to legal liability." She jabbed a finger toward me. "This is not over, Mr. Reynolds." "Not even close." Patricia stormed back to her Lexus and peeled out, leaving rubber marks on the street. I suspected she was right about it not being over, but I had no idea how complicated things were about to become. The next week was quiet, which should have been my first warning. Patricia was not the type to back down, and her silence meant she was planning something. The answer came in the form of a certified letter from the HOA's law firm, demanding $5,000 in fines for various alleged violations, daily accumulating charges for my truck's parking location, and threatening foreclosure proceedings if I did not pay within 30 days. The list of violations was creative. I had to give Patricia that. My grass was allegedly 1/4 inch above the maximum allowed height. My house number was not properly illuminated according to some regulation I could not find in any version of the bylaws. My mailbox had a small rust spot that constituted visual blight. And my truck, simply by existing in front of my house, was apparently violating noise ordinances, though it had not moved or made a sound in days. I forwarded everything to Sarah Chen, who called me within an hour. "This is harassment," she said bluntly. "Pure and simple. Patricia is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. The good news is that none of this will hold up. The bad news is that she can make your life miserable in the meantime, and fighting it will cost you money." What are my options? We can fight each violation individually, which will take time and rack up legal fees. We can sue the HOA for harassment, which will take even more time and more fees. Or," she paused, "or you can get creative." "What kind of creative?" "Well, I have been looking into something interesting about your community. The parking lot Patricia wants everyone to use, it is not actually owned by the HOA. That got my attention." "What do you mean?" "The lot was built by the original developer and is technically a separate parcel. The developer went bankrupt about 15 years ago, and the lot ended up in the hands of a property investment company called Southwest Holdings LLC. They have been letting the HOA use it for free all these years, but they still own it." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. "Can it be purchased?" I made some calls. Southwest Holdings is a real estate investment trust that manages hundreds of properties. This parking lot is tiny compared to their usual holdings. I bet they would sell it for the right price. Find out how much." Sarah called me back 2 days later with a number. "They will take $175,000. The lot is just sitting there generating no income, and they are happy to get it off their books." It was more than I had expected, but the idea forming in my mind made it worthwhile. "Draw up the paperwork. I want to close as fast as possible." "Owen, what are you planning?" "Nothing illegal," I assured her, "but I think it is time the Riverside Meadows HOA learned about free market economics." The purchase closed in 3 weeks. Southwest Holdings was thrilled to sell, and my financing was straightforward since I was paying cash. On a Thursday morning in late September, I became the proud owner of the Riverside Meadows community parking lot. I did not announce my purchase. Instead, I had a professional sign company come out and install a notice board at the parking lot entrance. The sign was simple and clear. "Private property. Parking by permit only. Unauthorized vehicles will be towed. For permit information, contact Reynolds Property Management." The phone number went to a Google Voice line I had set up specifically for this purpose. Then I waited. Patricia called at 9:15 the following morning. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 9:30. Voicemail. By 10 o'clock, I had 7 missed calls from her and 3 from other board members. I drove over to the clubhouse, where an emergency board meeting was apparently underway. Several cars were parked in the lot, though Patricia's Lexus was conspicuously in front of the clubhouse entrance, probably to avoid acknowledging the new signs. I walked into the meeting room without knocking. Patricia was mid-sentence, gesturing dramatically when she saw me. "You." "What have you done?" I settled into a chair. "Good morning, Patricia. I bought the parking lot. It is private property now." The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Patricia demanded explanations. I waited for the noise to die down. "Let me be clear," I said once they quieted. The lot was never owned by the HOA. It was owned by Southwest Holdings, and they sold it to me. Everything is legal and properly recorded with the county. "You cannot do this," Patricia sputtered. "This community needs that parking lot." Interesting perspective, considering you recently decided that everyone must park there instead of in front of their homes. So which is it, Patricia? Is street parking acceptable, or do we need the lot? She opened her mouth, then closed it, her face reddening. Board Treasurer Mike Henderson spoke up. "What do you want, Owen? You clearly did this for a reason." "I want the invalid parking regulations rescinded immediately. Return to the original bylaws that allow street parking in front of homes. Once that is done, we can discuss terms for the HOA to use the parking lot." "And if we refuse?" Patricia demanded. I shrugged. "Then you do not use the lot. I will rent spaces to community members individually, or maybe I will just gate it off and use it for storage. It is my property. I can do what I want with it, within zoning regulations." The board members looked at each other. Mike Henderson pulled out his laptop and started typing. We can call a special meeting and rescind the parking regulation. 30 days notice to all homeowners, proper vote, everything by the book. That sounds reasonable, I said. Patricia slammed her hand on the table. Absolutely not. We are not letting him blackmail us. Mike turned to her. Patricia, he owns the property. We have no legal standing here. And honestly, that parking regulation was rushed anyway. Half the community is upset about it. We voted on it properly. No, I interjected. You did not. 48 hours notice buried in an email about landscaping is not proper notice, and you know it. But I am willing to let that go if you rescind the regulation. The vote was 5-2 to rescind the parking regulation and hold a proper community meeting. Patricia and her closest ally, a woman named Cheryl who always backed Patricia's plays, were the only dissenting votes. 1 month later, the parking regulation was officially dead. Street parking was allowed again, just as it had been for years. My truck sat proudly in front of my house, and Patricia glared at it every time she drove past. Now came the fun part. I had Sarah draft a lease agreement for the HOA's use of the parking lot. The terms were simple. The HOA could lease the entire lot for use by community members. The lease would be month to month, and the cost would be $2,000 per month. Given that there were over 200 homes in Riverside Meadows, this worked out to about $10 per home per month, a modest increase to HOA fees. The lot had 52 parking spaces, so anyone who wanted guaranteed parking could use it. Mike Henderson reviewed the proposal and admitted it was fair. I do not like the month-to-month terms, he said. Can we get a longer-term lease? Sure, I said. 5-year lease at $1,500 per month if you pay annually in advance. That is $18,000 upfront, correct? Or you pay monthly at the higher rate. Your choice. The board discussed it at their next meeting. Patricia argued against signing any lease with me, but the other board members overruled her. They did not have $18,000 in the reserves for an annual payment, so they opted for the month-to-month lease at $2,000. The HOA fees went up by $10 per household per month. Some people grumbled, but most accepted it as a reasonable cost for parking access. My truck stayed in front of my house, and I collected my first check from the HOA in December. I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. Patricia did not take defeat well, and she had a vindictive streak that I had seriously underestimated. In January, I started receiving citations for new violations. My front door wreath was not approved by the architectural committee. My garden hose was visible from the street, which violated some aesthetic guideline. My garage door had a small dent that needed repair. Each citation came with a fine and a deadline. I contested every single one, providing photos, bylaw citations, and documentation that I was in full compliance with all legitimate regulations. Sarah sent formal responses to each citation, pointing out the overreach and harassment. Patricia responded by getting creative with her interpretations of the bylaws. She argued that my front door wreath was not a seasonal decoration, but a permanent fixture requiring architectural approval. She claimed my garden hose, even though it was neatly coiled on a hose reel, created visual clutter. The garage door dent, barely visible, was allegedly a safety hazard. By March, I had received 47 citations. Sarah was drafting a comprehensive harassment lawsuit, and I was documenting everything. But Patricia made a critical mistake. She decided to go after the parking lot lease. At the March board meeting, Patricia proposed that the HOA stop paying rent for the parking lot. We will simply inform residents that the lot is no longer available and that they should use street parking, she announced. Mr. Reynolds can keep his precious lot. We do not need it. The board actually agreed, probably exhausted from the constant conflict. They voted to terminate the lease effective April 1st. I got the notice in writing and called Sarah. She just gave me exactly what I needed. What do you mean? Patricia has been telling everyone that the parking lot is essential to the community. She has been citing parking congestion and safety concerns to justify all her regulations. Now she is saying the community does not need it. That is going to look really bad when we show the pattern of harassment. True, but what are you going to do with the lot now? Rent it out individually. At market rates, Phoenix parking in desirable areas went for about $150 to $200 per month per space. I was in a prime suburban location with good access to major roads. I set my rate at $125 per month per space, which was competitive and fair. I sent an email to all Riverside Meadows residents, offering parking spaces on a first-come, first-served basis. Within a week, I had rented 38 spaces. My monthly income from the lot jumped from $2,000 to $4,750. The HOA members who rented from me directly were happy. They had guaranteed spots, and the rate was reasonable. But the HOA fees did not go down. Since the HOA was no longer paying for the lot, the money that had been allocated for parking rent just vanished into the general fund. At the April HOA meeting, residents started asking questions. Where is the $10 per month that was added to our fees for parking? Marcus asked. If the HOA is not renting the lot anymore, why are we still paying the increase? Mike Henderson looked uncomfortable. The board decided to keep the fee increase to build up our reserve fund. So we are paying the same amount but getting less service. Patricia jumped in. The parking lot was never an essential amenity. We have adequate street parking. The reserve fund needs to be strengthened for future improvements. What improvements? Another resident asked. That has not been determined yet. The meeting devolved into arguments. Residents were frustrated with Patricia's leadership, the constant rule changes, and now the parking situation. Several people called for her resignation. Patricia refused, citing her one-year term that still had 4 months remaining. I stayed quiet during all of this, but I was taking notes. The discontent in the community was reaching a boiling point, and Patricia was too stubborn to see it. Then she escalated things in a way I never anticipated. In early May, I came home from a meeting in Scottsdale to find my front door ajar. My heart rate spiked as I approached carefully, pulling out my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, I heard voices inside. I pushed the door open wider. Patricia stood in my living room with Cheryl and a man I did not recognize. They were taking photographs of my interior. What the hell are you doing in my house? Patricia did not even look embarrassed. The HOA has the right to inspect properties for code violations. No, you absolutely do not. Get out of my house right now. The man with the camera spoke up. I am Bill Tanner, licensed home inspector. The HOA hired me to conduct safety inspections. I do not care if you are the governor. You are in my home without permission. That is called breaking and entering. I had already dialed 911, and the operator was on the line. I gave my address and explained that I had intruders in my home. Patricia's confident expression finally wavered. We have a right to inspect, she insisted, but she was moving toward the door. You have the right to schedule an inspection with the homeowner's permission, which you do not have. You just committed a crime. The Phoenix police arrived within 8 minutes. I explained the situation to the officers, showed them that my door lock had been picked, and pointed out the 3 intruders who were now standing on my front lawn. Patricia tried to explain about HOA inspection rights, but the officers were not interested in her interpretation of property law. They took statements from everyone, documented the forced entry, and informed Patricia that she could be charged with trespassing and burglary. "We did not take anything," Patricia protested. "You entered the property without permission with intent to conduct unauthorized activities," the officer said. "That meets the definition." I pressed charges. All three of them, Patricia, Cheryl, and Bill Tanner, were arrested and taken to the police station. I gave a full statement, provided the documentation showing I had never authorized any inspection, and requested copies of all the photographs they had taken. The arrest of the HOA president made the local news. The story spread through the community like wildfire. By the next morning, an emergency petition was circulating to remove Patricia from the board immediately. Sarah called me that afternoon. "I just got off the phone with the prosecutor's office. They are charging Patricia with criminal trespassing and burglary in the second degree. Cheryl and the inspector are getting similar charges." "Good. There is something else. I have been digging into the HOA's finances because of your harassment lawsuit. I found some irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" "The reserve fund that Patricia mentioned. It should have about $45,000 in it based on the fee increases and expenditures over the past 18 months. But the actual balance is $23,000. Where did $22,000 go? That is what I am trying to figure out. There are several payments to vendors I cannot verify, and some reimbursements to Patricia for supposed HOA expenses that do not have proper documentation." This was getting more serious. "You think she has been embezzling?" "I think there are enough red flags to warrant a forensic audit. And given that she was just arrested, now would be a good time to push for one." I attended the emergency HOA meeting that evening. The community center was packed with angry residents. Mike Henderson looked exhausted as he called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the removal of Patricia Morrison as HOA president in light of recent events," he began. Patricia was not present. According to her lawyer, she had been released on bail with conditions that included staying away from my property. But apparently, she was not showing her face at HOA meetings either. The vote to remove her was unanimous among those present. Mike Henderson was appointed interim president until a special election could be held. Then I stood up. "I have a matter to bring before the board. I have reason to believe there are financial irregularities in the HOA accounts. I am requesting a full forensic audit." The room went silent. Mike looked like he wanted to disappear. "What kind of irregularities?" someone asked. I let Sarah explain. She stood and professionally outlined the missing funds, the questionable expenditures, and the lack of proper documentation. By the time she finished, the residents were demanding answers. Mike Henderson admitted that he had been concerned about some of Patricia's spending but had not pushed the issue. "She always had explanations, and I did not want to accuse her of anything without proof." "Well, now we need proof," Marcus said. "One way or the other, audit the books." The board voted to hire a forensic accountant. The audit began the following week. While the investigation proceeded, I focused on my parking lot business. I had rented out all 52 spaces by mid-May, generating $6,500 per month in revenue. The lot was well maintained, properly lit, and secure. My tenants were happy, and I was turning a nice profit on my investment. The HOA, meanwhile, was in chaos. With Patricia gone and the finances under investigation, normal operations ground to a halt. Landscaping was delayed, pool maintenance was sporadic, and nobody seemed to know who was responsible for what. Mike Henderson did his best as interim president, but he had a full-time job and a family. He was not equipped to handle a full-blown organizational crisis. The forensic audit results came in late June. The accountant found that Patricia had embezzled $34,000 from the HOA over 18 months. She had been creating fake invoices from vendors, approving her own reimbursements for personal expenses, and manipulating the financial reports to hide the theft. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Sarah immediately forwarded everything to the prosecutor handling Patricia's trespassing case. The charges were upgraded to include theft, fraud, and forgery. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was not interested in going easy. The case went to trial in September. I testified about the harassment campaign, the invalid parking regulations, and the break-in. Other residents testified about Patricia's abuse of power and intimidation tactics. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the financial evidence. Patricia's defense was weak. She claimed she had only been trying to improve the community and that any financial discrepancies were honest mistakes. The jury did not buy it. She was convicted on all counts in October. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus additional fines. Cheryl got probation and community service for her role in the break-in. Bill Tanner, the inspector, lost his license and paid a fine. With Patricia's criminal conviction, the HOA was able to recover some of the stolen money through her assets, though not all of it. The insurance policy covered another portion. The community was bruised but recovering. In November, the HOA held a special election for a new board. Mike Henderson ran for president on a platform of transparency and common sense. Marcus ran for vice president. They won easily. One of their first acts was to review the parking lot situation. Mike called me for a meeting at a local coffee shop. "Look, Owen, I know things got out of hand with Patricia," he began, "but the community does need parking access. Can we work something out? What did you have in mind? You are renting out individual spaces for $125 each. That is $6,500 a month. What if the HOA leased the whole lot from you for $4,000 a month and managed the spaces ourselves? It would save you the administrative headache, give us control over parking allocation, and still give you a solid return on investment." I considered it. He was right that managing 52 individual lease agreements was time-consuming. 5-year term, annual payments in advance, with a clause that allows either party to terminate with 6 months' notice. That is $48,000 a year upfront. Correct. But it is less than you would pay at the individual rate if all spaces were rented, and you get certainty for 5 years. Mike did the math. That works out to about $20 per household per year, which we can cover through a small fee adjustment. Let me bring it to the board. The board approved the lease unanimously. The HOA fees went up by $2 per month, which was far less than the previous increase and came with clear value. Residents got guaranteed access to the parking lot. The HOA got stable costs, and I got a reliable income stream without the administrative burden. I signed the 5-year lease in December, and the HOA paid the first year in advance. My initial investment of $175,000 was now generating $48,000 annually, which was a solid return by any measure. But the real victory was not financial. The community had learned hard lessons about governance, accountability, and the importance of following proper procedures. The new board operated with transparency, held regular open meetings, and actually listened to residents. The parking regulations returned to the sensible original version. Street parking was allowed in front of homes. The community lot was available for those who wanted it. And nobody was getting harassing citations for minor aesthetic issues. My truck sat in front of my house every day, a quiet reminder of where this all started. Occasionally, new residents would ask me about it, and I would tell them the story. Most found it hard to believe until they talked to the long-time residents who had lived through Patricia's reign. I never set out to buy a parking lot or quadruple anyone's HOA fees. I just wanted to park my truck in front of my own house without being harassed. But Patricia's overreach and vindictiveness had pushed things to an absurd extreme, and I had responded in kind. The legal bills had been significant. Between Sarah's fees for the harassment lawsuit, the criminal case, and the various property matters, I had spent well over $50,000. But I had the resources to fight, and I felt a responsibility to push back against Patricia's abuse of power. Not everyone could have done what I did. Many homeowners would have been forced to comply with Patricia's demands, or sell their homes rather than fight an expensive legal battle. That disparity bothered me, and I made a point to support reforms at the state level for HOA governance. Sarah and I worked with a state legislator to draft a bill that would strengthen homeowner protections, require more stringent financial oversight for HOAs, and create clearer penalties for board members who abused their positions. The bill was introduced in the next legislative session, using Patricia's case as a prime example of why reform was needed. By the time spring rolled around again, life in Riverside Meadows had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board was competent and responsive. The community pool got upgraded with some of the insurance recovery money. The landscaping was maintained properly, and people actually looked forward to HOA meetings instead of dreading them. Marcus and I often joked about the whole saga over beers on his back patio. "You know what the craziest part is," he said one evening. "If Patricia had just left your truck alone, she would probably still be HOA president, and nobody would have discovered the embezzlement." He was right. Her vendetta against me had been her downfall. If she had picked her battles differently, or better yet, not turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom, she would not have ended up in prison. I had learned lessons too. I paid much closer attention to HOA matters now. I reviewed the financial reports every quarter, attended most board meetings, and stayed informed about proposed regulation changes. I never wanted to be blindsided again. The parking lot turned out to be one of the better investments I had made, not just financially, but personally. It had given me leverage when I needed it, generated ongoing income, and ultimately helped restore sanity to the community. Sarah became a good friend through the whole ordeal. We occasionally grabbed lunch to discuss HOA reform efforts or just catch up on life. She had built a thriving practice representing homeowners against overreaching HOAs, and she credited my case with raising her profile. "You know, you could have just moved," she said during one of our lunches. "Sold your house and found a place without an HOA." "I thought about it," I admitted. "But I liked my house, I liked the neighborhood, and I did not want Patricia to win." "Well, she definitely did not win." "No, but I do not think anyone really won. The community lost money, people's trust was damaged, Patricia destroyed her own life, it was all so unnecessary." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "That is the thing about power. Some people cannot handle even a little bit of it. Patricia had a title and some authority, and she let it go to her head. She forgot that she was supposed to serve the community, not rule it." That observation stuck with me. HOAs were supposed to be about maintaining property values and creating pleasant communities. At their best, they handled the unglamorous work of pool maintenance, landscaping, and basic rule enforcement that kept neighborhoods looking nice. At their worst, they became petty tyrannies run by people who enjoyed exercising control over their neighbors. The key was accountability, which was why I pushed so hard for the state reforms. HOA boards needed real oversight, proper financial controls, and consequences for abuse of power. Homeowners needed practical ways to challenge unfair rules without spending a fortune on lawyers. The reform bill passed in modified form that summer. It was not perfect, but it added requirements for independent financial audits, created a state ombudsman for HOA disputes, and strengthened homeowner rights to challenge regulations. Patricia's case was cited multiple times during the legislative debate. I attended the bill's signing ceremony in Phoenix, along with Sarah and several other homeowners who had suffered under abusive HOAs. The governor gave a speech about property rights and responsible governance. It felt like a victory, even if it was a small one. Back in Riverside Meadows, life continued to improve. The new board organized community events that actually brought people together instead of dividing them. We had summer barbecues, holiday parties, and even a community garage sale that raised money for local charities. My truck remained parked in front of my house, unmolested. Sometimes I would look at it and remember that orange notice that started everything. It seemed like ancient history now, though barely 2 years had passed. I occasionally wondered what Patricia was thinking in prison, whether she regretted her choices or still believed she had been in the right. I suspected it was probably the latter. People like her rarely accepted responsibility for their actions, but I did not waste much energy thinking about her. She was paying for her crimes. The community had moved on, and I had better things to do with my time. The parking lot investment continued to pay dividends, both literally and figuratively. The steady income was nice, but more important was knowing that I had helped protect the community from future abuse. The lot could not be weaponized against residents anymore because I owned it, and the lease terms were fair and transparent. Some people thought I had been ruthless, buying the parking lot specifically to gain leverage over the HOA. Maybe they were right, but I had been backed into a corner by someone who was abusing their authority, and I had used the tools available to me to fight back. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Would I recommend it to others? Only if they had the resources and the stomach for a prolonged fight. Taking on an HOA was not for the faint of heart or the light of wallet. As the second anniversary of the Orange Notice approached, Mike Henderson approached me about serving on the HOA board. "We need someone with your experience and willingness to stand up for principle," he said. I politely declined. "I will stay involved and keep attending meetings, but I do not want to be on the board. I am happy to advise, but I think the community is better served by people who actually want those positions." Mike accepted my decision with good grace. "Fair enough, but if you change your mind, the offer stands." I never did change my mind. I had proven my point, protected my rights, and helped reform the system. That was enough for me. The parking lot continued to generate income year after year. The HOA lease renewed twice, with modest increases that reflected market conditions. The relationship between me and the board remained professional and cordial. And my truck sat proudly in front of my house, a daily reminder that sometimes you have to fight for what is right, even when the opponent seems to hold all the cards. Looking back, I realized that the whole saga had taught me something important about standing up to bullies. Patricia had counted on me backing down, just like she counted on everyone else backing down. She wielded her HOA authority like a club, expecting people to submit rather than fight. But I had the resources and the stubbornness to fight back, and once I did, her entire house of cards collapsed. The parking lot purchase was creative problem-solving combined with a willingness to invest in principle. The quadrupling of fees was a natural consequence of Patricia's own policies combined with market rates. I had not set out to punish the community, just to protect myself and prove a point. The fact that it worked out financially was a bonus, but the real reward was living in a community that functioned properly, where rules made sense and board members served rather than ruled. My story spread through HOA reform circles, sometimes exaggerated, sometimes simplified, but always with the same moral. Do not assume that homeowners will just roll over when you abuse your authority. Some of us will fight back, and we might be more creative than you expect. I still got occasional calls from homeowners in other communities dealing with similar issues. I always gave the same advice. Document everything, know your bylaws, consult a good attorney, and do not be afraid to get creative. But also pick your battles carefully, because fighting an HOA could consume enormous amounts of time, money, and energy. Not every situation warranted buying a parking lot. Most could be resolved through proper channels, negotiation, or at worst, a well-crafted legal demand letter. But when you were dealing with someone truly unreasonable, someone like Patricia who would rather destroy the community than admit she was wrong, sometimes you needed to bring overwhelming force to bear. The parking lot was my overwhelming force. It was the business equivalent of a checkmate, a move that Patricia could not counter because it was completely legal, entirely justified, and utterly devastating to her plans. She had wanted to control where people parked to exert authority over the community. I bought the parking lot and turned it into a business asset. She tried to avoid paying for it and claimed it was not necessary. I rented it out individually at rates that made the HOA's previous cost look like a bargain. Every move she made to fight me just dug her hole deeper. And then she got desperate and broke into my house, which triggered her complete downfall. The criminal charges, the financial investigation, the discovery of embezzlement, it all flowed from that one panicked decision to cross a clear legal line. Sometimes I wondered if things could have ended differently. If Patricia had apologized after the tow truck incident and rescinded the parking regulation, would I have let it go? Probably. If she had not harassed me with endless citations, would I have even thought about buying the parking lot? Maybe not, but she had made her choices and I had made mine. The consequences played out according to logic and law. There was a certain satisfaction in that, a sense that justice, while slow and expensive, had ultimately prevailed. The community was better off. The HOA functioned properly. Property values had actually increased because buyers appreciated the transparent governance and lack of arbitrary rules. And I had a nice investment property that paid steady returns. My truck, the humble Ford F-250 that started it all, still ran perfectly. I had no plans to get rid of it. Every time I walked out my front door and saw it parked there, right where it belonged, I smiled. Patricia had threatened to tow my truck, so I bought the parking lot and quadrupled their fees. It sounded crazy when you said it like that, but it had been the logical response to an illogical situation. Sometimes you had to fight fire with fire, or in this case, fight parking regulations with parking lot ownership. The whole experience had been exhausting, infuriating, expensive, and ultimately satisfying. I would not wish it on anyone, but I did not regret how things turned out. I had stood my ground, protected my rights, and helped make my community better in the process. That was worth more than any amount of money or parking lot revenue. It was about principle, about refusing to be bullied, about using the tools at your disposal to fight back against unreasonable authority. And in the end, it was about winning, not just for myself but for everyone who had suffered under Patricia's petty tyranny. The orange notice was long gone, probably thrown away or buried in a file somewhere. But its impact lasted. It had been the first shot in a war I did not start but definitely finished. And every day when I parked my truck in front of my house, I remembered that sometimes the best revenge was not getting mad, but getting creative, getting leverage, and getting justice.